Welcome learners. I am Dr. Amuda from School of Management, Sastra University. I welcome to the session Purchase Management. Purchasing is an important function of materials management. In any industry, purchase means buying of equipments, materials, tools, parts, etc. required for the industry. The significance of purchase function varies with the nature and size of the industry. In a small industry, this function is performed by the works manager, and in a large manufacturing concern, this function is carried by a separate department. The moment a buyer places an order, he commits a substantial portion of the finance of the corporation, which affects the working capital and the cash flow position. He is highly responsible person who meets various salesmen and thus can be considered to have been contributing to the public relations efforts of the company. Thus, the buyer can make the company's image by his excellent or poor relations with the vendors. Purchasing is a function of procuring goods and services from the sources external to the organization. In the words of Alford and Berry, purchasing is the procurement of materials, supplies, machine tools, and services required for the equipment, maintenance, and operation of a manufacturing plant. Thus, purchasing is the function of procuring materials, tools, stores or supplies, and services required for the manufacture of a product, maintenance of the machines, and uninterrupted running of the manufacturing plant in a manner that guarantees the marketing of company's products in the desired quantities at the time agreed upon and at the competitive price consistent with the quality desired. Purchasing in essence is the task of buying goods right quality, in right quantities, at the right time, at the right source, and at the right price. Traditionally, purchasing was regarded as one of the activities of the production management. However, many progressive managements have already realized that, in view of changing business conditions, growing competition, and continuous escalation in the cost of the inputs, purchasing may be given a separate status equal to that of the other major functions like production, sales, finance, and personnel. The purchase department is headed by a purchase manager or a purchase officer. In some firms, a head of the purchase department is also called as a commercial manager or a purchase chief. Let us now see about the objectives of purchasing. The basic objective of a purchasing function is to ensure continuous supply of raw materials, subcontracted items, and spare parts, and to reduce the ultimate cost of the finished goods. In other words, the objective is not only to procure the raw materials at the lowest price, but to reduce the cost of the final product. The objectives of the department, namely the purchase department, may be to avoid the materials at the minimum possible cost, to ensure the continuous flow of production, to increase the asset turnover, to develop an alternative sources of supply, to establish and maintain a good vendor-vendee relationships, to achieve a maximum integration with the other departments, functional departments of the company, to train and develop the personnel involved in the materials, efficient record keeping and management reporting. Now we shall see each and every objective of purchasing in detail. The first objective is to avoid the materials, suppliers, and equipments at the minimum possible cost. The minimization of the input cost will definitely increases the productivity and results in the profitability of the operations. Now, the purchase of materials from the outside sources should be at the minimum possible cost but not sacrificing the quality of the materials. Whatever materials that are being purchased from the outside sources must have a continuous supply, and this continuous supply of materials must help the continuous flow of production in the company. Whatever components, tools, equipments are purchased for any repair and maintenance service or for the production service must be continuously available. The production should not be stopped for want of raw materials or want of instruction for the purchase of the raw materials. If the production is hampered or hindered, definitely the level of production anticipated will come down and the productivity will also come down. This may reflect on the profitability of the organization. The next main objective is to increase the turnover of the assets. The investments in the raw materials or the inventories should be kept as minimum as possible, because this asset turnover will be the indicator for the profitability of the company. The turnover of the assets should be high, that is, the materials should be fast moving and must be utilized as per the time expected. Suppose if the materials are not moving as expected speed, definitely this will result in the surplus of materials or at times the obsolescence also. The risk of spoilage, pilferation of the materials are also there, which may be inflating the cost of materials. So the maximum possible extent, the inventory should be utilized in a very efficient manner. And again, the investments in the materials should also be kept as minimum as possible. And again, the purchase manager should be aware of the alternative sources of supply, because if any problem or the issues or the challenges that are faced by the vendor, then that will be affecting the continuous flow of production in the company. In that case, the purchase manager must be able to identify the alternative sources of supply. Once again, exploration or identification of the alternative sources of supply will also increases the bargaining ability of the buyer, minimizes the cost of the materials, and increases the ability to meet the emergencies. So having the alternative sources of the supply of materials is said to be an essential objective of any purchase manager. Too much of dependence on a single supplier will definitely face some problems in emergency situations. The vendor-vendee relationship should also be maintained in a very cordial manner by the purchase managers. Maintenance of good relations with the vendors will definitely create a favorable image of the company in the industry. These relations are said to be beneficial both to the buyer and the seller in terms of bargaining power, in terms of fixing the reasonable prices for the materials, that the preferential allocation of the materials in case of the shortages, and the other benefits of bulk purchasing, etc. The preferential allocation of materials to the companies will be made in case of the expected material shortages by the vendors only when the cordial relationship exists between them. The materials manager or the purchase manager should also have a very cordial relationship with the other functional departments of the company. The purchase department is always related with the production department for the specification and the flow of materials. The engineering department should say about the purchase of tools and equipments and other machines needed. The marketing department must have the sales forecast, and this sales forecast will have an impact on the procurement of materials. The finance department must be coordinated for the purpose of maintaining the various levels of materials and estimating the working capital required. The personnel department should also be coordinated for proper manning of the department and developing the personnel in terms of their ability to manage the levels of inventories and to maintain a hardy relationship with the vendors. So, making an integrated communication or integrated approach with other functional departments, namely production department, engineering department, marketing department, financial department and personnel department is essential for a purchase manager. And once again, the purchase department should be manned with the various types of personnel, and they must be properly trained to handle the materials, to issue the materials, to store the materials, etc. So this imaginative employee force can be built only through proper training and development. And once again, the purchase manager should have a record keeping ability. Proper record keeping of the various levels of the inventories and reporting to the top management is said to be the basic objective of any purchase manager. This paper processing should be standardized, and so that the recording of all the materials should be facilitated. And periodic reporting should be made to the management regarding the various levels of inventories. So these are all the basic objectives of a purchasing department. I shall now put it in a nutshell. To have a proper supply of materials at the minimum possible cost, and to have a continuous flow of production, and to have a asset turnover, to have an alternative sources of supply, to maintain proper relations with the suppliers, integration with the other functional departments, developing the personnel in maintaining the inventories, and proper record keeping and reporting to the management. Based on these purchasing objectives, the company may form a purchasing policy and the procedures. Let us now see what is meant by the purchasing policy. The purchasing policy means a set of principles, purposes or rules of action framed. It may be written or it may be applied to fulfill the goals of the organization. So every organization must set a purchasing policy mainly to accomplish the aims and the objectives of the organization, and it must give the instructions to purchase the materials to the purchase department. Proper directions and the instructions must be given in the purchase policy, and proper procedures should be mentioned so that it will facilitate the purchase manager to have a scientific purchasing and to have the continuous purchasing for the organization. Let us now see what will be the advantages if you have a proper purchasing policy in an organization. These purchasing policies will define the objectives, and it will also give meaning to the objectives framed by the top management. Suppose if there is a transparent and a clear understanding of the objectives by the people who are implementing the purchase policy, then there will be no suspicion in the minds of the people who are implementing. So the objectives must be properly clarified and properly defined to the people who are involved in it. And the instructions and the directions must be written form, and it must communicate the best use of the management. What does the management aims at? It aims only at the maximum possible usage of materials at the minimum cost. So that must be revealed to the personnel who are using or who are following the purchase policy. And once again, the purchase policy must be clear enough and it should guide the person who is going to adopt this method. And it must give a basic framework for any decision making in the organization. Sometimes it may have some demerits also. In case of the organizations which are in a very large size, it is very difficult to communicate the policy, particularly changes which are made quite often. But in spite of it, the management must take all these efforts to communicate the changes in the policies and the reason for the changes and what will be the benefits for the changes that are being made. Though it is taken as some disadvantage, but nowadays in the advent of the technological innovations, we should not say that the policies cannot be communicated. It should be properly communicated with the reasons for the changes. And again, all the employees are not aware of the policy. Once again, this disadvantage can also be criticized. This disadvantage cannot be accepted in this era, and all the employees must be aware of the policy's purpose. They must understand for what purpose the policy has been made. So when he is inducted in the purchasing department or a materials management department, then he has to be given proper reasons for following the purchase policies. More of the purchase policies is very much difficult to create an awareness. So numerous purchase policies should not be there. Standardized policies must be there, and every standardized policies must be clear enough to understand, and it must be transparent enough to the personnel. And once again, the personnel must be involved in the purchase policies of an organization. So what all may be the challenges that are made in the implementation of the purchase policies? The organization must take its own efforts to communicate the basic purpose of the purchase policy. What are all the management views regarding the implementation of the purchase policies? How these purchase policies will help to achieve a maximum profit to the organization with a minimization of the cost. At any point of time, the purchase manager must guarantee that following the purchase policy will not hinder their own work in their proper scheduling of their work in the organization. Based on the purchasing policies, the organization will go in for the procedures for the purchasing. The purchasing procedures should not be too lengthy. They should be simple enough to understand, and the policies should give proper guidelines to the personnel, and these guidelines will give a direction to purchase. Normally, the guidelines will involve the basic rules for purchasing, the conduct of the purchasing personnel, the social and minority business objectives, and the operational issues. The purchasing procedure involves 8 basic steps. The first step being need recognition, selection of a supplier, placing of orders, following up of the orders, receiving and instruction of the materials, payment of the invoice, maintenance of the records, and maintenance of the vendor relationships. Now we shall see all the 8 steps in detail. The first step being the need recognition. The initiation procedure starts with the need recognition by the needy section. So the production departments must send their own requisitions or the needs to the purchasing department. That is what is the need recognition. The demand is lodged with the purchase department in a proper purchase requisition form that is to be forwarded by the authorized person either directly or through the stores department. And this will be a continuous periodical exercise by the stores department. The purchase requisition clearly specifies the details such as the specification of materials, the quality of materials, the quantity needed, and the suggested suppliers and other related information. Generally, the low value sundries and items of common use are purchased for stock, while costlier and special items are purchased according to the production budgets or production programs. Generally, the corporate level executives are authorized signatories to such demands. Such purchases are approved by the board of directors. The reference of the approval is made on the purchase requisition, and a copy of the requisition is sent to the secretary for the purpose of overall planning and budgeting. To prepare a master budget, this information is needed. The next step comes to the supplier selection. The process of selection of supplier involves two basic aspects: searching for the all possible sources of supply and shortlisting of the identified sources of supply. So, exploration of the suppliers and shortlisting the suppliers based on the quality of the materials and other specifications of the materials. The complete information about the supplier is available from various sources, namely trade directories, advertisements in trade journals, direct mailing by the suppliers, interviewing the suppliers and the salesmen, suggestions from the business associates, information from trade fairs, participation in the convention of inventories, industries, etc. The complete information about the supplier is available from various sources such as directories of the trade associations, advertisements in the trade journals, direct mailing by the suppliers, interviews with the suppliers, suggestions from the salesmen, suggestions from the business associates, trade fair visits, and participation in the convention of the industries. Identification of more and more sources helps in selecting a better and an economical supplier. It should be noted here that the lower bidder is not always the best bidder. When everything except price is equal, the lower bidder will be selected. This means that quality cannot be sacrificed, mainly because the price is very low. So unless otherwise the price is equal, the lower bidder should not be selected. The important considerations in the selection are the price, the ability to supply the required quantity, maintenance of the standards of quality, the financial background of the supplier, and the continuous supply of the materials. It should also be noted here that it is not necessary to go in for the process of all types of purchases. For repetitive orders and for the purchases of low value or the purchases of small lot items, generally the records of the previous suppliers is enough. Next comes the order placing. Once the supplier is selected, The next step comes to the placing of the purchase orders. The purchase order is a letter sent to the supplier asking to supply the mentioned materials as per the specifications. At least 6 copies of purchase orders are to be prepared by the purchase section, and each copy should be separately signed by the purchase officer. Out of these copies, 1 copy each is sent to the storekeeper, supplier, account section, inspection department, and to the department placing the requisition, and 1 copy should be retained by the purchase department for the record. 1 copy to be sent to the storekeeper because the storekeeper should know that the order has been placed and it has to be received in time. Another copy to be sent to the supplier, mainly to place the order with the supplier. Another copy to be sent to the account section, mainly to account for the materials ordered. The inspection department should also be announced regarding the placing of order, and it should be ready for inspecting the materials when received. And once again, the department which has requisitioned should also be supplied with a copy indicating that the materials requisitioned has been ordered. And another copy should be maintained by the purchase department mainly for their own record purposes. The 4th step being follow of the order. Simply placing the order and waiting for the materials is not enough. The purchase manager should have a proper follow-up of the orders placed. Follow-up procedures should be employed wherever the cost and the risk resulting from the delayed deliveries of materials are greater than the cost of follow-up procedure. The follow-up procedure tries to see that purchase order is confirmed by the supplier and the delivery is promised. So this step includes that the supplier has to give his own consent to supply it. That is, it has to be confirmed by the supplier, and he has to deliver the products as promised. As promised means as regards the time, the quality, quantity, etc. It is also necessary to review the outstanding orders at regular intervals and to communicate with the supplier in case of need and emergencies. Generally, a routine info is to be made to the supplier by sending a printed postcard or a circular letter asking him to confirm that delivery is on the way or will be made as per the agreement. Though the oral communication can be made, a written communication is said to be preferable as it gives an accountability on the part of the supplier to supply the materials on time. In the absence of any reply or unsatisfactory reply, the supplier may contact through the personal letter or a phone or a telegram or even through a personal visit. Suppose if the supplier is making a delay in making the reply, then the supplier place can be visited in person, or he may be called over the phone and asking for the reasons for the delay in delivery. The 5th step involves receiving and inspecting the materials. The receiving department receives the materials supplied by the vendor. The quantity are verified and tallied with the purchase order. The receipts of the materials is recorded on a specifically designed receiving slips. We call it as goods receipt note, GRN, or it may be in any form which will specify the name of the vendor and the purchase order number. It also records any discrepancy or the damaged condition of the consignment or the inferiority of the materials. The purchase department is informed immediately about the receipt of the materials. So the receipt will be made by the stores department, and it has to inform the purchase department that the materials has been received, and a copy of the receiving slip must be sent to the purchase department indicating that the materials ordered has been received by him and properly instructed. In case of any damage to the quality of the materials, then it should also be informed to the purchase department and supplier, and it should be properly returned back, and it should also be sent to the supplier. The next step is the payment of invoice. When the goods are received in a very satisfactory condition and the quality, the quantity is as per the order or as per the sample show or as per the specifications sent, then the invoice is checked before it is approved for payment. The invoice is checked to see that the goods were duly authorized to purchase and they have been properly ordered and they are priced as per the agreed terms, and the quantity and quality conform to the orders, and the calculations are correct regarding the price and the total value. The next comes the maintenance of the records. Maintenance of records is considered to be very important, and it is said to be a part and parcel of the purchase function. In many industrial firms, most of the purchases are said to be the repeated orders. Hence, the past records will serve as a good guide for your future action. They are said to be very useful for designing the timings of the purchases and in selecting the best source of supply. So, the records should be maintained properly by the purchase department for your future references also. Last but not the least, it comes about the maintenance of vendor-vendor relationships. The quantum and frequency of the transactions with the same key suppliers will provide a platform for the purchase department to establish and maintain good relations with them. Good relations develop mutual trust and confidence in the course of the time, which is beneficial to both the parties. The efficiency of the purchase department can be measured by the amount of goodwill it has with its suppliers. So, proper vendor-vendor relationships will definitely help the purchase manager to have a proper delivery of the materials in time. And again, in case of the scarcity of materials, or it may be the shortage of materials as expected in the market in future, then the vendor will supply the materials in advance and they can store it in the stores so that the flow of production will not get affected. Vendor-vendor meetings should also be maintained by the purchase department, and again, you must have an informal relationship or informal communication with the vendors, and if any issues or challenges in the vendor's place can also be solved by the organization so that the mutual consent or the mutual support can be had for the supply of materials, which will help the continuous flow of production. This continuous flow of production with the quality of materials supplied by the vendor will definitely decreases the cost of production and increases the productivity. This will, in long run, will increase the profitability of the organization. So, the purchase department should have the following procedure as discussed. This procedure, once again, I will mention the need recognition by the production department based on the needs, the selection of the suppliers, based on the selection of suppliers, the orders are placed and it has been followed up, and after following up the orders, it has been received and inspected. After receiving the good quality products, the payment of invoice should be made, and after the payment, the maintenance of records must be made by the purchase department for the future references, and the vendor-vendor relationship should be maintained by the purchase department. Now we shall see the parameters of purchasing. The success of any manufacturing activity is largely dependent on the procurement of raw materials of right quality, in right quantities, from right source, and at the right time and the right price, popularly known as 10 R's of the art of efficient purchasing. They are described as the basic principles of purchasing. There are other well-known parameters such as right contractual terms, right material, right place, right mode of transportation, and right attitude are also considered in purchasing. Let us now see the 10 R's in detail. Right price. It is the primary concern of any manufacturing organization to get an item at the right price. But the right price need not be at the lowest price. It is very difficult to determine the right price. General guidance can be had from the cost structure of a product. The tender system of buying is normally used in public sector organizations, but the objective should be to identify the lowest responsible bidder and not the lowest bidder. The technique of the learning curve also helps the purchase agent to determine the price of the items with a high labor content. The price can be kept low by proper planning and not by rush buying. Price negotiation also helps to determine the right prices. Right price does not mean the lowest price, but the price which minimizes the overall cost. Right price is not very easy to determine. To arrive at the right price, the following techniques can be employed. Negotiation. Negotiation can be used when there are limited vendors or when the time available to purchase is short and when the items belong to a fixed price category. Tender system. Tender system is followed in public sector undertakings to identify the lowest potential bidder, and learning curve is employed to determine the price of the items with a high labor content. Thus, the right price means the lowest responsible price but not the lowest price. As we discussed earlier, negotiations, the tender systems and learning curves can be employed to determine the price of the items. Next comes the right quality. Right quality implies that quality should be available, measurable, understandable, as far as practicable. In order to determine the quality of a product, sampling schemes will be useful, and the right quality is determined by cost of materials and technical characteristics as suited to the specific requirements. The quality particulars are normally obtained from the intents. Since the objective of purchasing is to ensure the continuity of supply to the user departments, the time at which the material is provided to the user department assumes the greatest importance. Quality of a product is measured in terms of its design, chemical composition, heat treatment, surface treatment, manufacturing processes, mechanical and electrical properties, workmanship, etc. Two distinct but closely interrelated aspects of quality are quality of design and quality of performance. Quality of design for the purchased items refers to the quality specified by company's design department in the form of specifications, while quality of conformance refers to the extent to which goods and services are purchased complies with the specifications laid down. To decide the quality of conformance of purchased items, sampling plants are used. Different methods of providing quality specifications are brand or trade name, commercial standard, performance standard, blueprints, samples, etc. The next comes the right time. For determining the right time, the purchase manager should have lead time information for all products and analyze its components for reducing the sale. Lead time is the total time elapsed between the recognition of the need of an item till the item arrives and it is provided for use. This covers the entire duration of material cycle and consists of pre-contractual administrative lead time, manufacturing and transporting lead time, and instruction lead time. Since the inventory increases with a higher lead time, it is desirable to analyze each component of lead time so as to reduce the first and the third components which are controllable. While determining the purchases, the buyer has to consider emergency situations like floods, strikes, etc. He should have contingency plans when force major clauses become operative. For instance, the material is not available due to strike, lockout, floods and earthquakes. Right time and lead time are closely related. Right time implies the time at which the goods are requested should be received, while lead time refers to the time between the communication of the need for an item to be purchased by the intender till the item is actually received and is made available for consumption. The buying department has the sole responsibility of developing lead time information for all items and make it available to those concerned, mainly planning and stores, so that they intend their requirements well in advance and avoid the need for rush purchases. The basic elements of lead time are the time required by the intender to communicate the requirement to purchase, time required by purchase to locate, select and develop qualified sources of supply, including finalization of agreement, etc. It also includes the transit time for the purchase order to reach supplier, the time required by the supplier to route buyer's order through his administrative channels, the time required by the supplier to fill buyer's order, that is the time required by suppliers to manufacture the goods, transportation time for the goods to reach buyer's destination, time required by buyer's receiving department to collect the materials from the transporter's godowns, verify the quantity received and prepare the necessary documents, time required by the buyer's inward instruction section to verify the quality of the goods, the time required by the main stores to take the possession of the goods, deposit them into appropriate bins and update the inventory, then a time taken for issuing the materials, carrying them to the place of work. Since the inventory investment of an item to a large extent is influenced by its lead time, the buyer must analyze each of the above mentioned elements and try to reduce them to the extent possible. This is especially important for the items of A and B categories under ABC classification of inventories. Occurrence of one or more contingencies, namely strike or lockout, flood, etc. at supplier's plant may require the purchase department to make rush purchases from local suppliers at a higher price, this being possible for the following items. Reduced to commercial standards, the new suppliers are approached and craft the developed item. To ensure the continuity in production, buyer must maintain sufficient inventory in case of single source items. The next comes the right source. The source from which the material is procured should be dependable and capable of supplying items of uniform quality. The buyer has to decide which item should be directly obtained from the manufacturer. The selection of the source, the development of the source, and rating of the vendors play an important role in buyer-seller relationships. In case of emergencies, open market purchases and bazaar purchases are resorted to. Only the right source can give the quality of materials in right quantities at the right price and at the right time. Right source aspect involves decisions as to the kinds of items to be purchased directly from the manufacturers, from which dealers and from which open market, etc. Right source also requires the analysis of transportation cost along with the basic price to make the selection between distant supplier and the local one. The next comes the right quantity. The right quantity is the most important parameter in buying. Concepts such as economic ordering quantity, economic purchase quantity, fixed period and fixed quantity systems will serve as broad guidelines. But the buyer has to use his knowledge, experience and common sense to determine the quantity after considering the factors such as the price structure, availability of discounts, availability of the item, favorable reciprocal relations and make or buy consideration. Right quantity is said to be a parameter in the buying procedures. Quantity decisions are influenced by replenishment methods or buying methods. Replenishment methods such as reorder level, two-bin system, review system, optional replenishment and review system, compulsory replenishment help to provide broader guidelines. Take for example, order quantity under first three systems is fixed and generally the economic ordering quantity. Yet, the same might have been modified in the light of constraints. Economic ordering quantity is the quantity where the carrying cost and the ordering cost are kept minimum. However, the reorder quantity under the fourth system, that is the compulsory replenishment review period, varies and it equals the difference between the maximum level less the sum of stock on hand and stock on pipeline. Buying methods followed by the buyer has an influence on ordering quantity. Reordering quantity will be determined in the following methods as follows. Hand-to-mouth buying is too small. Scheduled buying can either economic ordering quantity or small or larger than EOQ. Forward buying is generally very large, covering a long period of consumption. Contract buying is receiving in staggered lots, each lot at times may equal to EOQ. Besides the above mentioned factors, consumption of the materials, market conditions, the lead time, the sources of supply, whether it is domestic or foreign, will influence the decisions of right quantity. The next comes the right attitude. Developing the right attitude is necessary as one often comes across such statement. Purchasing knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. We buy price and not the cost. When will our order placers become purchase managers? Purchasing acts like a post boss. Therefore, purchasing should keep progress as its key activity and should be future oriented. The purchase manager should be innovative and his long-term objective should be to minimize the cost of ultimate product. He will be able to achieve this if he aims himself with the techniques such as the value analysis, materials intelligence, purchases research, SWOT analysis, purchase budget, team lead time analysis, etc. The next comes the right contracts. The buyer has to adopt separate policies and procedures for capital and consumer items. He should be able to distinguish between indigenous and international purchasing procedures. He should be aware of legal and contractual aspects in international practices. Purchase order is a legal document that binds the selling company with the buying company. Various terms and conditions about insurance, sales tax, octroi, excess, customs, breach of contract, settlement of disputes, etc. are to be clearly mentioned. In case of price fixing, the free on ride, free on board, free alongside ship, carriage insurance price should be decided. So the taxes payable, namely octroi, excise, customs, nowadays it is taken as VAT. So value of the tax that are being paid has to be decided along with the terms of the contract. Right material. Right type of material is required for production and it is said to be the most important parameter in purchasing. The techniques such as value analysis will enable the purchaser or the buyer to locate a right material. Right transportation and right place of delivery. Right mode of transportation have to be identified as this forms a critical segment in the cost profile of an item. It is an established fact that cost of shipping the ore, gravel, sand, etc. is normally more than the cost of item itself. Specifying the right place of delivery like head office or works would often minimize the handling and transportation cost. In most of the cases, items have to be supplied directly to the consuming units, which may be located at far distant places from the headquarters. The place of delivery should be mentioned in the supply order. Right procedure. The right procedure has to be adopted and it has to be formally developed before the pre-purchase, ordering and also post-purchase systems. Pre-purchase means initiating the purchase through the requirement of intents, planning, selection of suppliers, obtaining the quotations and evaluating them. Along with the purchase order, an acknowledgement copy is also sent to the supplier, who returns the same duly signed as a token of acceptance of the purchase order and to abide by the terms and conditions mentioned as in the order. Thus, the purchasing parameters includes the right material, which is having the value analysis and standardization as the main technique, right attitude with the SWOT analysis, right place of delivery with the price communication, right sources with the vendor rating for the purchase, right contracts with regard to the legal requirements, right transportation with the logistics and transportation cost, right time regarding the lead time, reorder point, right price regarding the learning curves and your negotiation, right quantity deciding about the inventory models and EOQ, right quality regarding the specifications. These are the basic purchase parameters which are to be considered while purchasing. The scientific purchasing is not mere a procurement of the needed materials at the lowest price, but procuring the way in which it minimizes the overall cost of the product. As we have seen earlier, the cost of purchase can be minimized with the 10 R's as we have mentioned, as right attitude, right place of delivery, right sources, right contracts, right transportation, right time, right price, right quantity, right quality and the right material. So these are all the basic R's which are to be considered for the efficient purchasing methods. This efficient purchasing methods will definitely help an organization to maintain a scientific purchasing, to minimize the lowest cost and to maintain the right quality and right quantity of purchase and at the right time from the right place. Thank you.